Eyes Sparkle with Tears. You'll remember that I promised a video about Liana Kerzner and gaslighting. Well, here is that video. You know, gaslighting is a term that gets thrown around on the internet quite frequently, and sometimes it is actually applied correctly. Other times, it's not. So you know me, I have that unreasonable expectation that words should mean what you actually use them for. So let's take a look at the history of gaslighting. So the term itself originates from a play by Patrick Hamilton in 1938 by the name Gaslight. And then it was adapted into the film Gaslight as well. And the story, which has Ingrid Bergman, by the way, if you get a chance to see it, watch it, because Ingrid Bergman was one of the legendary actresses, but not to be confused with Ingmar Bergman, who was a legendary director. Now I want to know if there was an Ingrid Bergman movie where Ingmar Bergman actually directed. Well, in the story, a husband manipulates his wife into doubting her own perception of reality. One of the ways that he does this is by constantly dimming the gas-powered house lights while insisting nothing had changed when she notices it. Over time, he systematically denies observable reality. He hides objects, he invents incidents, reframes her reactions as signs of instability in order to make her distrust her own judgment, and it makes her easier to control. So, gaslighting as a term entered psychological and cultural vocabulary as a term for a specific form of manipulative psychological abuse. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which a person seeks to make another person doubt their perceptions, memories, judgment, or sanity. The clinical and psychological discussions often focus on a persistent denial that events occurred at all, a reframing of observable reality. Colloquially could be said, who are you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes? A contradiction of clear memories or even contradiction of evidence. Minimizing and mocking reactions, false narratives that are designed to destabilize confidence in your own recall and your cognition, and creating a dependency on the manipulator as the arbiter and interpreter of what is real. The term is now used in both the psychological context and more loosely in everyday discourse, but many psychologists note that its popular use has broadened significantly beyond the original meaning. But in this case, I am going to go with the majority of the psychological definitions. Persistent denials of events that actually occurred, the reframing of reality, the contradiction of clear recall or even clear evidence, and even the minimizing and mocking of reactions too, all wrapped up in false narratives that are designed to erode your confidence in your own memory and cognition and enhance your dependency on someone as the interpreter of that reality. As the adage that I've always quoted goes, I never make claims I can't back up. So the reason I've mentioned all of this is to prepare you for the evidence that I'm going to show you that Liana Kerzner does in fact gaslight people. She gaslights her audience, she gaslights her friends, and she gaslights her enemies too. So I'm starting with an example that could be considered a minor example, except that if you're familiar now with the way that I present evidence, it often tends to be compounding, built upon each other to show a much larger pattern at work. And once you become familiarized with that method, you're going to see how much of this is echoed in the subsequent behavior that I will show. At one point, Asher added Mark Berry on Twitter. Now, I have already mentioned that the only reason Asher isn't on Hellscape is because Liana Kerzner managed to get him banned on Blue Sky. And I have shown evidence as to why I say she did so, because I have shown evidence that Eileen and most likely a good number of the other moderators in her Discord server weaponized brigade reporting to get people banned. I have also shown evidence that Blue Sky moderation is largely automated, and that there are thousands of people who get banned without any recourse to an appeal or ever get a response from moderation, and usually only people with enough fame and following to cause a large number of people to raise a ruckus usually get their accounts returned, like Miss Betty Bowers, for example, who got suspended twice. So Asher added Mark Berry regarding his account of the things that were going on, including the evidence that I had just started publishing online. Evidence that makes a good amount of the claims on his letter appear extremely flimsy and disprovable. We will see. There is an episode dedicated to how Liana Kerzner leverages Mark Berry as a legal threat and intimidation, because I think it is important that people know what is going on and how Liana is able to abuse Canada's honestly quite bad defamation laws to silence people. Well, the result of the acting, though, or at least it seemed to be that way on this side, is that Mark Berry deleted his account or suspended it. Asher remarked on the apparent cowardice of Mark Berry. Now, of course, Liana, being Liana, she has to turn everything into a moral crusade in which she and those with her are always the morally injured party at the hands of some narcissist or monster or terrible person or horrible person. You take your pick of the day. And she essentially made this skeet where she claimed that Asher was crowing that he had hurt someone so much that they had abandoned the internet. This is a 60-year-old man. This is not some 13-year-old boy or girl. So again, Liana does not give any specifics, but then later on she also adds this. And this is where the gaslighting happens. Now, she has deleted this skeet because we quickly published evidence that showed that she was lying. In this skeet, she claims that, Asher must have been hallucinating or lying because Mark Berry left the internet for real in 2019 and has never come back, according to this article. Except that, Mark Berry's history is searchable on Twitter because he's back. We'll get into that in just a second, but here he is replying to Ed the Sock in 2020, and here he is replying to Liana Kerzner and Ed the Sock in 2023. Now, here's the thing. When you do some research into his account, Mark Berry's account apparently has a tendency to go up and down more often than the Argentinian economy. Even a cursory glance through his history suggests that anytime he says something spicy or he really puts his foot in it, he essentially disconnects his account if he starts getting too many negative responses. In this case, on April 20th, he essentially argued with Merriam-Webster Dictionary about marijuana not being an English word. And subsequent to that, he got a sizable amount of people reacting as normally you would. That is a very nonsensical stance because, English is what happens when Vikings learn Latin and use it to shout at Germans and then the French shout back, essentially. And it was actually the Canadian science fiction writer and critic James Nicole who said English beats up other languages in dark alleys, then rifles through their pockets for loose grammar and spare vocabulary. Unsurprisingly, people took objection to what seemed to be a pretty hot take and a kind of a chauvinistic take from Mark. May have been part of what caused him to disconnect his account, because if you look through his history, he does that with frequency anytime that one of his hot takes gets a little bit too hot. His account comes back very frequently. In fact, Mark Berry is so attached to his Twitter account that in February of 2023, there was a big drive of people asking for help to get his account returned because it had been hacked. But yes, you can find multiple tweets across the years remarking how often Mark Berry seems to deactivate his Twitter account. Now, the interesting thing is that he always does it for a period of just below 30 days, so he can always come back to his username. Usually about the time that it takes for any hullabaloo to usually die down, and then Twitter's outrage can focus on someone else, I imagine. But to essentially posit that he left social media definitely in 2019, even though Liana Kerzner knows this is not true because, again, Mark Berry added her and her husband in 2023. yeah, she is lying. She is essentially trying to gaslight Asher. Oh no, no, you poor delusional man. You did not actually have a conversation with my lawyer. You didn't at my lawyer. My lawyer was never here. It was all in your mind. Of course, it's also painting a false narrative to people who will not do any research because they trust her implicitly, which is a very bad thing, as I have already demonstrated with my errors in that judgment. This is a poor delusional man who is apparently both claiming that he hurt someone so bad that they ran off social media, while also that social media person was never there in the first place. You just saw the episode about stigma, so that is tainted identity and gaslighting in one go. Excellent. That's a double trouble. Does she get any points? Now, Liana Kerzner doesn't only try to gaslight people that she is having a contentious relationship with, she also tries to gaslight her audience. How can I say this? Well, you know my mantra, right? Well, let's take a look. In the episode, Are You Accidentally an Asshole? She spends a good amount of that episode actually talking about us. So how much of that episode was she talking about us? Let's measure it by word count. By word count, the transcript of the episode is 6,406 words. The first section, where she talks about us, runs about 1,196 words, or at this point, 18.7% of the episode. Then, when she gets into money and reciprocity, it's about 315 words. So the total amount at this moment is about 1,511 words, which is about 23.6% of the episode. So if we look at the weird situation where she goes from the anonymous message that she claims is from us, very irresponsibly, Miss Journalistic Ethics, through the section where she talks about the money loans, which were actually not loans, and I'll get into that later. And then going through to the very end where she talks about the business arrangements, etc. And my arguing on social media, which wasn't, it's about 2,422 words. So 35% of the episode. Structurally, it's closer to 1/3 of the episode built around talking about us. In the episode, she opens by irresponsibly attributing one of the many anonymous messages she received through her very poorly secured submission form as a message coming from us. Again, Liana had no way of verifying that information, but she nevertheless broadcast it over a radio show that has potentially up to a 3 million listener audience. So that is a massive ethics violation. Attributing that, the email apparently pointed to my husband's blog and my social media account, which had been tagged. Again, I have already exposed evidence that shows that Liana Kerzner and her moderators use brigade reporting on Discord to get accounts suspended and tagged when they become very inconvenient to her narrative. So then Liana Kerzner goes and proceeds to misrepresent my account to the listeners, saying that, that the account tag rude means that I argue with people all the time and that I'm an awful person. When actually, if you look at my account, which you can't because it got suspended, you'll see that of the thousands of skeets that I made, very few of them were actually arguing with people. But in fact, you will be able to see for yourself because I did download my car file before I was suspended, very shortly before I was suspended, in fact. And I'm going to put that car file up online so you guys can see exactly what it was that I was saying and what exactly caused Liana Kerzner to obviously whip up her moderators into a frenzy of reporting to get my account suspended. Spoiler alert, actually, you're seeing a good chunk of those in the evidence that I have put here. Funny enough, Liana Kerzner silencing me on Blue Sky only meant that now the evidence is being seen by people on YouTube. Listening to her podcast is not a pleasant experience for most of us, but I do recommend that you go listen to the episode yourself so you can hear it for yourself, especially the things that she says about my account and about me. And the interesting part, of course, comes when she talks about the loans, which were not loans. Liana Kerzner is reinterpreting many things here, as is her standard practice. She's talking about business transactions that she is now presenting as loans, as well as personal gifts and aid that she gave to me me as a friend. Now, the interesting thing is that, of course, she paints herself as this magnanimous benefactress. She's done it with song, she's done it with a good amount of people that she has cut ties with. It's always interesting how much she will apparently generously give as a friend, and then when the friendship is over, she starts holding that over people like there were strings attached all along. But in the boss fight website in Claim 11, I actually covered this section even before she went on the radio. She was already talking about it on her Discord server, because she talks about all the money that she gifted us and all the money that she loaned us, which weren't loans. But in the website, I show evidence that I myself performed a lot of unpaid work for Liana Kerzner to the tune of thousands of dollars as per her estimation. Now, if the estimation is incorrect, then that means that she must have been lying on the grant applications for the work that I did, because a good chunk of that work was meant to be Darwin Mack's game XY Girls about trans women in space, where I provided, according to Kerzner, about $1,200 worth of character design and artwork. I also composed a lot of music for her YouTube series and the Kickstarter campaign for free, and even got one of my opera singing friends to provide vocals for some of the chiptune cabarets. I composed the music for Friendship is the Greatest Game of All, ironically, which was the finale of her boss fight series. So, all in all, I provided quite a bit of value, monetarily speaking, to Liana, something that she never acknowledges. And I guarantee you now that even though I am a composer and I have had a good amount of success as a composer in the last year, she will tell you that my skill wasn't worth the investment. I can guarantee you that right now. Just like she's probably telling her server, just like she allowed Eileen to say in her server that I really wasn't a very good singer when, back in the day when I was actually giving free vocal performances for her YouTube channel, she said this.
We did all right, all things. I mean, he's an incredible singer. Mouse Mary, just, man, that guy, part of the reason I wanted to do a thing with him, even as a parody song, and I'm glad he was willing to take his big, Italian tenor voice, his big Madame Butterfly voice, and be a sim. And he was the one that did all the visuals. So he's the one that made all the sims, the Beelzebub sim and the Liana sim and the Momo sim. He did all of that. He did a great job. He went really above and beyond.
With Liana, gaslighting is just part of the package. It comes with a repackaging of old history. It doesn't matter if you remember her saying something different about a person back then. No. This is the way it always was. Just like her reaction to me saying that I could introduce her to Richard Garriott in a social environment within the Ultima Dragons was treated as cool when I mentioned that to her when she was feeling sad about what happened at PAX, which I'll get into. But later on to her audience in Discord, she said, she only said that to make me feel cool. The past is never steady with Liana Kerzner. It's always up for reinterpretation depending on the needs of the situation. And she hopes that you don't remember, and if you remember, she's going to try to get you to not remember. How do I know this? Well, let's take a look at what she actually said in the episode, because Asher has compiled a very, very handy-dandy video about that. In this April 16, 2026 Patreon video, more stalker follies, now with doxite, which it isn't a doxite, but in any case, Liana Kerzner begins the section with her best impression of a woman accused of eating the last tub of salsa in the refrigerator.
No, it ain't! The other show they claimed about them was, Are You an Accidental A-Hole? That show is about no one in particular. That was things everybody does sometimes, or majority of people do. Couldn't have picked two worse shows to make that case. So obviously there are some delusions here, but how you choose to address your particular challenges in terms of mental health, that's what makes you a good or bad person, and or good or do good or bad things. That show is about no one in particular.
Now, the other episode is an episode about AI, and honestly, we can't really remember what we said because we didn't say much about it. Because, yeah, the real offender is this particular episode. But she talks about these are things that everybody does. So let's go into the things that everybody does. Apparently,
accidental a-holery, a cautionary tale. That show is about no one in particular. There's this really weird situation that I found myself in, still kind of do, even though I haven't spoken to these people in at least over a year. And it was because I cut ties with them, because they just couldn't stop being a-holes. They'd recognize something was wrong and do it again, insist they felt so bad about something but wouldn't develop a plan to prevent it from happening again, and they wouldn't stop arguing and complaining. And the arguing and complaining part is what's relevant here, because one of the things that I just couldn't take anymore is they were constantly fighting with complete strangers online. And because people saw me connected to them, we even had some business stuff going. The people they were fighting with started taking a not great interest in me, including trying to spread false rumors about me and my work. So that, among other reasons, I got distance. I tried to talk to them about it. It went horribly distance, right? Fast forward to about a month ago. I got a message, the It's Not Therapy website contact form. That show is about no one in particular. Not therapy show. Yeah, we have a contact form. If this keeps happening, I'm going to get rid of the contact form because, okay, I can't tell if messages like this are actually from one of the people I cut ties with, or the not great people that they tend to antagonize, and the not great people antagonize back, and then trolling and cyber stalking ensues, right? But I got this weird message like, stop this now, stop. I'm like, what am I doing? I haven't talked to you or really about you in quite some time. And there were links in this message. And those took me to, I think it was some X posts, Twitter. X sounds off. My X post, yeah. That show is about no one in particular. No one in particular. In particular. Do you see how that works? Do you see how that works? You see how that works? Do you see how that works? See how that works? Do you see how that works? Do you see how that works? See how that works?
man, is Liana right or what? I mean, don't you just hate it when you allegedly send Liana an email message to stop while pointing to a blog you wrote about how she is silencing people on social media while you yourself are getting labeled rude because you allegedly argued with people online and incidentally happened to have had a business relationship with Liana and incidentally she allegedly loaned you money that wasn't actually a loan? I mean, everybody does that from time to time. This episode could be about anyone. Show of hands, people. So there you have it, Liana Kerzner gaslighting her audience, and in this case a Patreon video, so she was essentially gaslighting people who were paying to be gaslit. And I'll say this, who looks at that 44-minute rambling mess of an episode where 1/3 of it is dedicated to us and listens to all of that and goes, "Oh yes, indeed, this is clearly about no one in specific, anyone could be these people." I don't know why I suddenly channeled Hyacinth Bucket.
Tell God it's Bouquet!
Right. Sorry, Mrs. Bouquet. Rest in peace, Patricia Rutledge. But there you go. Right to her very own audience. These are people who can listen to the episode and verify the things that she says. And the fact that she's not getting any pushback on this tells me that these people believe her or aren't listening to her episodes. I'd like to think is the latter because God knows I certainly don't want to listen to her episodes, but you never know, right? So again, this is just her Patreon audience, which is a small subset of her total audience as a Saga FM broadcaster. Her show has a potential reach of up to 3 million people, so these are things she has broadcasted about us to 3 million people, potentially. And that is a serious ethical violation. From the very beginning of ascribing an anonymous message she could not verify came from us to us, and then the rest of the mess of that episode. And instead of owning up to an ethical violation, which is essentially to anyone who has any degree of journalistic integrity, is to recognize that she took an unverified source, treated it, and presented it as a verified source to a large audience, what does she do? She gaslights her audience. I mean, suddenly she's Commander Riker in Beyond Belief.
It's false. No way. Not this time. We created it. Not this time. No, not this time. It's totally made up. Pure fiction.
Plus also adding some psychologizing, because again, she called us delusional for seeing ourselves in the episode where she clearly was not talking about us. And now I want to mention something here. This is someone who clearly has spent a very long time not being challenged. And there is a good reason for that. You see, Liana Kerzner claims that one of her triggers is not being believed. I think it's an incredibly convenient trigger for someone who says a lot of things that are not true to claim that if you don't believe her, you're going to trigger her into a trauma response. And we'll get into trauma responses later. But I suspect that a good amount of the reason why a lot of people don't really push back against her is that they're afraid of traumatizing her. But here's the thing, if someone is actively lying and gaslighting people, it doesn't matter what their triggers are. They need to stop doing that shit. Because let me state the point clearly for you. This is someone who is participating in the ruination of people's identities, as per my episode in Stigma and Spoiled Identity. So it doesn't matter if she has a trigger about not being believed. If what she is saying is not believable because it is proven that she's lying, she needs to be confronted with the truth. Because at this moment, you're essentially saying that the victims of her lies are less important than her feelings. And if we're going to talk about victims, then my third example is perhaps one of the most gut-wrenching ones, and one that I had some participation in. However, that tale is a little bit more involved. In fact, it requires quite a few more details. So I'm going to split the episode here. The next episode will have 2 more examples. The first one being perhaps the most significant, which is the gaslighting of Roberta Vaughn and what happened at PAX. The second one is where I point out that Liana Kerzner's story about a trauma response changes radically, and nobody has noticed. Now, turning on to recent things, well, Liana has been wilding because she tried that Kickstarter bullshit and it hasn't turned out well. Some Kickstarter backers have been speaking up about, well, the dodgy things happening, so she has done what she usually does. Now, I want you to take a look at her Blue Sky profile and notice what she does a lot. So, let me explain. When Donald Trump gets caught in a lie, or gets caught doing something he shouldn't have, or is being criticized, what does he do? Well, he goes into what the media call the Trump chaos cycle, which is a massive whirlwind of chaos, accusations, usually without proffering any evidence, all geared towards creating a destabilization and also create a great deal of busy work for everybody involved. People usually start trying to debunk some of the outrageous claims that he makes without evidence. And so that may eventually derail them from doing what they were intending to do. Like, for example, right now, who's talking about the Epstein files? Right. Do you remember what was happening in Minneapolis earlier this year? No, you don't, right? Likewise, Liana uses that very, very same tactic again. So now she's pivoting and moving the goalposts and trying to make it seem that I also committed the client violation of privacy thing. And I will speak about the saga of Giancarlo Vanzini very soon in full detail, but I'm going to put it here. I did make a video about Giancarlo Vanzini and how I arrived at uncovering his identity. But I'm going to summarize it very quickly here, and then we'll go into detail in another video. Giancarlo Vanzini was not a peer counseling client of mine. He was a creative consulting client of mine. I did creative consulting work on his novel, a young adult queer novel, by the title of Outcasts, which was inspired by his obsession with The Outsiders. The novel, not the Batman series. Over the course of our consultorship, it also turned out that he was trolling me under a troll identity called Movie Pirate on Twitter, also violating my intellectual property by feeding my art to AI in attempts to get a rise out of me. On his main account, though, he proceeded to be incredibly dismissive and insulting of my husband during one conversation, which was the basis of me terminating our professional relationship, at which point he doubled down on his troll persona, even to the point where he endangered my husband by trying to get Kiwi Farms to essentially initiate a harassment campaign against him. Over the course of several months, we discovered evidence that corroborated the identity of Giancarlo Vanzini as the Kiwi Farms user Shaniqua. Shaniqua, incidentally, actively participated in the Kiwi Farms thread that actively targeted Poppy Diabolique / Jessica Routhier, a trans woman who was besieged by Kiwi Farms. Despite our disagreements with Poppy, which are just that, disagreements, we do not believe that anyone should be subjected to what Kiwi Farms subjects people to. And so, I have no moral obligation in keeping the identity of Giancarlo Vanzini secret as the user of Shaniqua in Kiwi Farms, precisely because his actions actively endanger trans individuals and other at-risk individuals. So Liana Kerzner is extremely angry that Asher and I did this. And incidentally, she has confirmed that we were correct in identifying this individual, by the way. So it was not a wild accusation. We worked on months to find out who they were, because Asher is that good. But Liana Kerzner is trying to draw a moral equivalence between us outing a transphobic, potentially homophobic internet troll who makes money out of writing young adult queer novels, so predating on his own audience. And what exactly? Because again, Liana Kerzner divulged the identity and mental health history of Mitchell Jura to Asher, who was not a peer counselor, who was never a facilitator in any of Liana's groups, and therefore had no reason to acquire that information. Liana shared private text conversations from Giant Enemy Crab because he irritated her. So again, Liana Kerzner is trying to draw some very strange moral equivalences here, and she is far more interested in being outraged that someone outed a kiwi farmer than she is outraged about her own actions disclosing mental health information. And that honestly has to make you wonder why. And in the end, it works against her because a lot of the things she does in that Trump chaos cyclone that she makes often ends up getting addressed anyways because the evidence is that prevalent and her patterns are so predictable that she has done shit like this in the past. So buckle down, because we have a week of Liana Kerzner incoming where I predict she's going to spin like a typhoon. She's going to go into full Trump chaos cycle. She will fling whatever accusations she can at the wall without, of course, any evidence. As many plates as she can get in the air so people can try to catch them, so that she doesn't actually have to deal with the evidence that is coming up, and she doesn't have to actually deal with the documentation that is coming up, which she will call, of course, false allegations and taken out of context. But seriously, how is that taken out of context? I am showing you a linear progression of how the story has changed, according to her own words. Is she taking herself out of context? Is she editing time and space? I don't know. Who knows with Liana Kerzner at this point? But yeah, then tune in tomorrow for part 2 of the gaslighting, and that one is going to be kind of hard. But nevertheless, it's a story that I do need to tell. But before we go, though, I have to address this particular skeet because it's just adorable. It's literally on the website. It's in the section under accountability. Now, to be fair to you, considering how allergic you seem to be to that word, I can see why you didn't see it. But in any case, have a good day, everybody else.